We're in the midst of James chapter 1, verses 2 to 11, a section on the wise perspective on trials. And we saw in verses 2 through 4 that God has a divine purpose in trials to produce in us endurance as He's sanctifying us and making us into whole, complete people, lacking in nothing. We see in this next section, verses 5 to 8, we're going to focus on in this video, about the wisdom that is necessary to view trials from this divine perspective, to view our trials rightly. Let's go through the verses now. Verse 5, E detis humon lepetai sophias, aiteto para tu didantas thau, pasen haplos, kai me anadidzantas, kai dathesetai auto. Translation: But if any one of you lacks wisdom, and you know, you're like, what are we talking about wisdom? I thought we were talking about trials. And sometimes it's hard to piece together the sections of James like that. But if you remember, James loves to connect similar words. So before he's talking about lacking in nothing, God is shaping us to be people who ultimately in His presence will be lacking in nothing. And now he's talking about lacking something, lacking wisdom. And the most natural way to understand that is wisdom to see our trials from a divine perspective, because we can't do that naturally. That's a supernatural work for Christians to rejoice in their great difficulties. So again, picking back up here at the beginning of verse 5, but, or now, if any one of you, right, that's a partitive genitive there, the humon, right, that's the whole, the all of you, of which someone, tis, is a part. That's called a partitive genitive, the whole of which something else is the part. If any one of you lacks wisdom, and that verb of lacking there, lepetai, the lexical form is lepo. The word frequently occurs in medial passive, middle passive forms with a middle idea. So this is just a present middle indicative. It's the third person singular. And if you look this verb up, you'll see it takes a genitive object. That's why Sophias is in the genitive. If any one of you lacks wisdom, right? Wisdom is the genitive direct object for that. Let him ask, and that's just from the verb aiteo, to ask. The verb aiteo is to ask. So this is just a present active imperative. It's an imperative form, third person singular. Those third singular imperatives are sometimes confusing for people because we learn to translate them, let him ask, or things like that, but it really means he must ask. It means, hey, if this is you, ask, right? It is an imperative. If any one of you lacks wisdom, let him ask from God, right? From God. But it's not just God, right? We have this huge adjectival modifier. From what God? Well, the God who gives to all unwaveringly and does not reproach. He doesn't demean or insult as He gives, right? All of that is we have two participles that are basically attributive participles modifying God. Who is this God? He's the God who gives to all, right? To all without exception. To any who come to Him seeking wisdom, calling out to Him, to any of His people who come to Him seeking wisdom, He gives to all without exception, without distinction. He gives to all. Hoplos. When you see a word that ends in os, it's probably an adverb, which corresponds to an English ly word. And it's interesting, isn't it, that almost every English translation translates this generously, but if you look at virtually any commentary, they'll all say that's not the best translation, right? This is like the idea of single intent, right? Or I like the translation unwaveringly. It seems that God is being contrasted with people. People are often like choppy waves of the sea. We're going to see in a moment. You know, one moment believing, or one moment doubting God, throwing up a prayer of desperation, even though they really don't believe in Him. And so humans are fickle and untrustworthy, but God is unwavering. And He's not only unwavering, he's just what He appears to be. He doesn't have a dual intent in giving. He gives without reproaching. He doesn't give in such a way that it demeans or degrades the person who's receiving. I had the fortune, the good fortune, the blessing, the providential blessing of being raised in a healthy and loving family. But I know some people have relationships in their families where it's constantly this dysfunction of someone making them feel demeaned and insulted and reproached. But God isn't like that. He's not that kind of heavenly Father. And so if you were raised in a family like that, it's maybe difficult to view God rightly. We're viewing him through a distorted lens. So again, picking back up, but if any one of you lacks wisdom, let him ask from God. Well, tell me about this God, the God who gives to all unwaveringly and does not reproach, and it will be given to him. That verb dathesetai, that's just from didomi. Remember, whenever you have a word that has a da or a do in it, it's almost certainly from didomi. We see the theta there. The theta is like a guy kicking back in an easy chair. He's feeling passive. He's got his remote control. And there's no augment here, so it's not an aorist passive. This is just a future passive. It's a future passive indicative. That ending is third person singular. It will be given to him. And it's probably rightly understood as a divine passive. In other words, God is the one who's doing this activity. It doesn't explicitly say that in the text, but it will be given to him by God is clearly implied. And so when you have a passive where God is the implied agent, that's called a divine passive. So let's keep going to verse 6. And James goes on to give these instructions. Let's read in Greek first. Aiteto de in piste, meden diakrinomenos, Hagar diakrinomenos, eoiken, kludoni, thalases, anamidzameno, kairipidzameno. And let's translate this. But let him ask, right? That's exactly the same imperative we had above, a present active imperative, third person singular from aiteo. Means he must ask. Means, hey, if this is you, ask, right? It's an imperative. But let him ask in faith, in piste. That's a prepositional phrase expressing the manner in which he's asking. He's not asking in an unbelieving way, but rather in a believing way. And that's further driven home with this participle, doubting nothing. In other words, doubting not at all. And so it's a call to come to God, believing that he's good and that he doesn't lie to. God is loving and he keeps his promises, right? This is not a call to like work up this amazing faith that you know exactly how God's going to answer the prayer, but it's to come to him in a believing posture that he is who he says he is, that he's good and loving and a father, as Jesus called people in his ministry to believe in him and to come to him in faith. And we have this explanatory gar clause. Remember, in Greek, the words gar and de always jump second in the sentence here, even dividing up this article ha and the substantive participle it goes with. For the one who doubts, diakrinomenos, right? That is just a present middle participle. It's nominative, masculine, singular, and it's used substantively, right? There's the article with it. For the one who doubts, eoiken, is like, and that's sort of like a word like oida, in that it's an old perfect, but it really is translated like a present, eoiken. And this word eoiken takes a dative object. That's why kludoni is in the dative. He's like a wave. He's like a wave of the sea, blown and tossed, right? And those two final participles there are just attributive. They're describing the wave. That's why they're dative, masculine, singular. They're dative, masculine, singular because they're describing the noun, which is dative, masculine, singular, kludoni, right? Kludoni is dative, masculine, singular, wave, and so these two participles are attributively describing it. What kind of wave is it? Well, it's a blown and tossed wave. It's an erratic wave. It's being blown here and there by the wind. And James is, in his just memorable preacher fashion, he's like, that's what someone is like who's not coming to God, trusting in him, believing he keeps his promises, believing he's a loving heavenly Father. They're like an erratic wave just blown here and there by the wind. And that contrasts with God, who gives unwaveringly, who gives without any kind of erratic or unpredictable or any kind of demeaning way that he doesn't interact with us in that way. We continue in verse 7. Me gar oiestho ha anthropos ekenas hati lempsetai ti para tu kuriou. And so here again we have these little post-positive words like gar jumping second in the clause. For that man, ha anthropos ekenas, there's your subject, for that man should not think, this is from the word oiomai, to think or to suppose, oiomai, to think or to suppose. You can see that's a middle preference verb. It's a verb that prefers the middle voice, and as we noted earlier, verbs of mental conception or cognition frequently prefer the middle. And the form here in the verse is just a present middle imperative, and it's second person, well, pardon me, it's a third person, present middle imperative, third person singular, the subject being that man. That man should not think. Notice how the imperative is negated with may. Remember, indicative mood is negated with oo or ook or ook, right? That's the negation word for the indicative mood. The non-indicative, the imperative, subjunctive, and so on, is negated with may. So let not that man think means that man should not think that he will receive. Lampsetai is just the future of lambano. It's a future middle indicative third person singular. It's irregular in spelling. So it's just one of those ones you have to look up and memorize, but it's from the verb lambano. A few letters there are similar, but in the end this is just so irregular you'd have to look it up and memorize it. Let not that man think that he will receive anything, that's just your indefinite pronoun anything, from the Lord. Right? So James, a strong warning here against erratic, unbelieving approach to God. Verse 8. And then this is sort of a, well, let's read it in Greek and then we'll try to figure out how to translate it. Aner dipsukas akatastatas in pasais tais hadois autou. If we just do it real literal, double-souled or double-minded man, unstable in all his ways, right? We try to figure out, well, how does that connect with what goes above? And most English translations will add in a verb is, he is a double-minded man. Maybe there's an implied participle of me, own, being a double-minded man, and it's kind of causal because he is a double-minded man, unstable in all his ways. I mean, the meaning, I think, is clear. Grammatically, exactly how it connects is a little bit more of a hypothesis, right? Because we don't have a participle here. We don't have, but Greek frequently will imply the verb to be. So whether it's an indicative form or participle form, right? James is saying this doubting person is a double-minded man, double-souled man, right? That fits with the erratic wave. Here this way one moment, this way the next. Very different from God, who's unwavering. This double-minded man who's unbelieving is unstable. Not just unstable in faith, but that spills over into every area of his life. It says in all his ways, right? And that is a, we might call that prepositional phrase as something communicating reference or respect, right? You say, well, unstable with what? With his finances? Unstable with, no, unstable with respect, with reference to all his ways.